Greetings and welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Very happy to introduce my guest for this particular program as a gentleman I've known for a long time, long admired him. There are many, many individuals who admire Michael Schratt, that is for sure. And, it's shocking to me that this is the first time that we've done a sit-down interview together on our mutual subject of interest. But I just want to give a quick little bio here for Michael from what I have. Michael is a private pilot, military aerospace historian, and a researcher into the subject of UFOs. And my feeling is anyone who has a serious and especially technical interest in elements of the UFO phenomenon knows that Michael Schratt is one of the preeminent individuals out there to follow. He's traveled widely to UFO type events and to aviation, aerospace events, as a featured speaker, lecturer. He's interviewed countless aviation professionals, other individuals with firsthand experience in classified black budget programs. We're talking U.S. Air Force pilots, Navy pilots, personnel, aerospace engineers, people with top secret SCI security clearances. Michael actively searches through archives of many different organizations doing original research and doing something that I think a lot of people do not know about Michael, or at least not well enough, which is he has a gift for bringing to life cases that are long since forgotten, or even classic cases. What he'll do is go through archives and meticulously recreate them using his outstanding ability in a variety of computer-aided design software. So he will render these craft, the situation, the sightings in ways that words just can't do. Michael's skills in this regard are very strong, and this has been a unique contribution that he's made. I think one thing that does come across with Michael is that he is one of these individuals that I respect so much as a concerned citizen. Michael believes that it is our constitutional obligation to question authority and demand an accounting on special access programs that bypass congressional oversight and public scrutiny. And that's one of my favorite things about this man. The other thing about Michael is that he's just so humble, but so knowledgeable. Michael, a pleasure to have you on. So hope you don't mind the long intro.
Oh, Richard, thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you.
Right back at you, sir. So look, let's get right to it. I think one of the things that folks wonder about you is that because you've given a lot of lectures on UFO phenomenon, but you're also very, very, very astute with aviation history, military technology, military history. And so, you've argued in a number of cases about certain UFOs being not extraterrestrial, but simply the product of advanced classified technology. So what's your attitude on the so-called ours versus theirs issue relating to UFOs?
Mm-hmm. Good question, Richard. A while ago, I wrote a white paper report basically titled Ours or Theirs, and I looked at the pattern that's developing when you look at these cases. For example, Hudson Valley Boomerang 82 to 89. We had tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom of the craft. Then you move forward to the 1989-1990 Belgium Triangle case. Same tubes, pipes, and cylinders. Then fast forward to January 5th, 2000, Southern Illinois Triangle case. They also had tubes, pipes, and cylinders. And we had reports from multiple police officers where they were directly below the craft. And what they were doing is they were projecting the star field above the craft on the bottom surface of the vehicle, essentially allowing it to blend in with its background. That's exactly what we've learned about electrochromic panels as well. So when you put this mosaic together, you see these independent indicators that show you or give you a very good heads up of what could potentially be ours or theirs.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think, I've always had the impression that you've suspected the Hudson Valley cases were primarily ours, and that is human technology. Is that your position on this?
In 95% of the cases, I do believe that it's a man-made technology. Yes, I do. For Hudson Valley Boomerang, yes, I do.
Yeah, and how about the Belgian cases or the Illinois case of 2000?
Same thing for there too as well, because you start looking at these patterns, Richard, and it keeps repeating over and over again. For example, being tested on Thursday nights, that's a real key element, because the March 24th, 1983 sighting over the Taconic State Parkway was on a Thursday night. And we see this over and over and over again. The quote unquote aurora was also done on Thursday nights as well. Oh, actually Thursday mornings. Yes.
Interesting.
Yep.
So in terms of the kind of craft that was seen over the Hudson Valley, and I mean, what you're talking about are objects that were, I believe, described as quite large, at least in some cases, not in all of them. Objects that were able to shine bright lights down on the road, on the motorists below them. Objects that I believe were generally described as silent or nearly silent in most of the cases. They weren't super rapid moving, it's true, as far as I recall, very slow moving. But like in one case, you have a couple of cases, you had an object over the nuclear reactor in the area, the Indian Point, described as something like 3 football fields in length. I mean, for me personally, I have a very difficult time seeing that as man-made technology. But I genuinely want to know what you think about that.
All right. Well, let me hit you, Richard, with Monique O'Driscoll's sighting. This is what she had to say, and this is published in the Philadelphia Inquirer, September 28th, 1984. This is Monique O'Driscoll. Mm-hmm. And then here's what she says. I could see the underbelly part. It's solid. It had metal type worked like cross beams and tubular things hanging down here and there. I was so close I could have thrown a ball and hit it. So she's with her daughter, mm-hmm. and they're near Kent, New York, and this boomerang flies directly over their vehicle, and it's a CE2 case because it had electromagnetic disturbances. This thing parks itself over the local frozen pond, does a 180-degree flat turn looking back at her, and then all of a sudden starts shining these multicolored flashing lights below, and she could see the reflection below on the frozen pond.
Yeah.
It's an incredible sighting.
So what are we talking about then? Like, what are these things? Who's making them, in your opinion? What would their mission be as well?
Good question. Well, I've recently come across some new information which I believe solves part of the Hudson Valley boomerang mystery. 95% of these, in my professional assessment, are man-made craft, and what we're dealing with, Richard, is something called the DRAGON program. This stands for Digital Reconnaissance and Observation Network. This is a DARPA-funded program, also operated by the U.S. Air Force, NASA, and the National Reconnaissance Office. And a lot of information can go into this, but this basically solves almost all of the criteria of the Hudson Valley boomerang, like the transparent panels on the bottom of the vehicle, the crossbeam and girder construction, the low frequency electrical humming noise like a sewing machine or a transformer. It just matches all the criteria.
So it's a reconnaissance type of platform?
It's a reconnaissance type platform, and it had sensors on it. And this is being flown up and down the East Coast tri-state region. And this was one of the craft that was seen by thousands of eyewitnesses. Now, there were some pilots that were trying to mimic the form, fit, and function of this craft, but the people who saw the original craft and saw the airplanes could tell immediately they were talking about 2 different birds. No doubt about it, because in the original Hudson Valley boomerang sightings, when this thing made a flat turn, all the lights were embedded in concrete as this thing turned as one complete unit. But when you have planes flying in formation, they could never duplicate what this craft could do.
Well, I'm just fascinated by this analysis, but I guess you do have an idea of how this object would be able to perform the maneuvers it does, even in the 1980s. I guess most of us would be surprised to know that we would have had craft at that particular time that would have been able to perform the kinds of maneuvers that you're describing that we all know happen in the Hudson Valley. So right. What were the principles that this particular platform was using to do what it did, to make these types of non-radius turns and maneuver the way it does?
The way it was explained to me, Richard, what they're using is high energy charged quantized excited particles, superfluid and cooling, exotic, mobile, open and closed system. I couldn't pull any more data out of the contact that I spoke to. He gave me that much and nothing more. So
that's not a lot of technical mumbo jumbo just to say, get out of here, kid. I don't want to talk anymore.
I know. I mean, I tried so hard to pursue this further, try to keep everything in the loop here. But if you look at the characteristics of this craft, and then you compare that to quote unquote Stormville flyers, Richard, that we're seeing flying around, it's obvious we're talking about two different craft, because if you're flying in formation and you're at level flight, you can sort of keep position with the other planes. Now keep in mind, this is at night, this is treetop level, no sound basically, and they're hovering, right? If you're going to make a left-hand turn, the planes on the left have to slow down, and the planes on the right, by default in mathematics, they have to speed up to keep that radius going. So you can see how it just can't be done. And then
no, they could not do that.
They could not do it. They could not do it. Yeah.
No. So yeah, you're saying that there's something very, very unusual there, but it's almost certainly terrestrial, not extraterrestrial in the case of the Hudson Valley. I know you're working with Linda Zimmerman on some of these cases, and I just recently chatted with her. She did a local talk for my Rochester group, actually, not long ago.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm trying to think if that her position is the same as yours, that these are terrestrial, and it's very possible you may have different opinion here. But I guess, my attitude is these seem, some of them so very large, like the one at Indian Point, the nuclear facility.
Right.
I have a difficult time squaring that with any kind of terrestrial technology that we're putting out there. On the other hand, I will say this, I have more than enough respect for your knowledge and background and research in this, that I would always be willing to listen very carefully to any explanation you have on this one. So what do you think about the nuclear case at Indian Point?
Yeah,
this was an object that was described as 900 feet roughly in diameter, 3 football fields, and hovered motionless over the one functioning reactor at that particular time for quite some time.
July 24th, 1984, absolutely hovered over the reactor for at least 20 minutes with about a 20-knot wind that night. So you can rule out ultralights, no doubt about it. According to multiple sources, there were 12 Nuclear Regulatory Committee security guards on site. They were all shocked. They had their mouths on the ground. They had shotguns pointed at this. And a helicopter gunship was called on site, but from what I understand, did not fire on the craft. So this did happen, and it was not an isolated incident.
Right. This is out of a movie. Like this could be made very. Did you do a rendering of this, by the way?
I did not, but I had it commissioned. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've got. So what do you think that was? Was that ours or theirs? I'm putting you on the spot here.
I know. I've got to go with my research into the airborne mobile over-the-horizon radar system, Richard. I still think it's one of ours.
Okay.
I still think it's one of ours.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
I'm respecting your opinion on this, and you may very well be right. Now, you do think some of these objects are not ours. I mean, I sense that you get the idea that some of these UFOs are not terrestrial. So you do have that position.
Yep. Even David Marler chimes in on that, because a lot of these black triangles were seen a long time before Kelly Johnson got the Skunk Works going in '43. So these things date back a long time prior to that.
Yeah, and indeed, I mean, there are just some UFO cases that are, I would say, well observed, well recorded, that make it really difficult the farther back you go. I've mentioned a few times, I found a case in the Canadian archives. I was up in Ottawa, of a gentleman who wrote after the fact in the early 1980s as an elderly man about his experience in the Canadian Northwest Territories in 1936. I'll have to show you the text of it, but he was doing aerial mapping for the Canadian government up in the middle of nowhere, and had an aircraft that would land on the water and so forth. And he was doing a pre-flight check, looked straight up, middle of nowhere, and saw an elongated object, he said, directly above him that was in a north-south configuration. He watched it rotate east-west, gunmetal, dull color, no reflection, no markings of any sort, and it just instantly accelerated to the horizon, gone within seconds. So that was 1936, middle of nowhere. A very, very well written account. I mean, I have to assume that it was a truthful account.
Yep.
He submitted his military record to the Canadian government, although that was not available to me when I found the archive. But nonetheless, it seemed like it was just another of these impossible sightings from way back.
I remember you talking about that case, Richard.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, made a big impression on me. So, Michael, can we talk
Yep.
a little bit about some of your artwork, your rendering work? And you know, before we did this interview, we were chatting about it, and you were incredibly meticulous about saying, "Well, I didn't do all of these. I've had help." But clearly, you know, you're the driving force on these. And so, can you just explain to people what you have been doing all these years, going through old cases, and you've been creating graphic representations of them?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, credit has to go to John McNeil for doing a number of these, and then my good friend Tom Bogan. I want to give him credit as well. So, brief nutshell, Richard. Living in the Chicagoland area, I was in about a 1 hour's drive from the Center for UFO Studies. That was 2457 West Peterson Avenue, Evanston, which is essentially downtown Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Every Sunday, I would set up an appointment to go to the QFOS archives, and about over a 3-year time period, I was able to go through all, I would say, 40,000 cases, Richard.
I just want people to understand,
Yep.
I mean, for those who may not be quite aware, this is the organization founded by Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the man who, of course, was the Air Force consultant to Project Blue Book, which now is on the History Channel. But Allen Hynek at one point was called the Galileo of UFO research, and he was really the man who, more than anyone else, was the most prominent UFO researcher of his era, and founded this organization. And you were just saying 40,000 cases.
Yep, 40,000. And I literally did go through each 40,000. I mean, one by one, pulled out the folder. And these, you know, we're talking like 20 to 25 file cabinets. Mark Rodiger was so nice. He gave me access to the whole collection. And what's really weird, Richard, is throughout all that time, there was like nobody else there taking advantage of the material. Nobody was.
Wow.
Nobody was. Wow. It seemed like a wasted resource, you know?
Yeah. It truly is.
Yep.
Truly.
And so the plan was get there every Sunday in the morning, spend as much time as I could possibly spend there, and just start going through the files, pulling out the drawers, pulling out the files. And my criteria was I would only pursue an illustration if it had a really detailed sketch drawing, maybe a scribble or a doodle, and then paperwork to back it up. If it didn't meet that criteria, I moved on to the next one. Mm-hmm. And so that was the process that took about 3 years to do. And looking through those cases, I mean, some of these had been buried for 40 years and completely forgotten about. They weren't written in IUR, they weren't written in NICAP, MUFON didn't see them. And so I dug out these obscure, forgotten, left for dead cases and just started cleaning up the drawings.
Before we get into the details, may I just ask you, in your estimation, what percentage of the cases in the QFOS files would you consider to be like unusually strong cases?
5% maybe?
Yeah, I was thinking
that
something
really met a good criteria, maybe 5%. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to do a little quick math. So out of 40,000, so that would be about 2,000. No.
I'd say that.
Is that right?
That might be a little bit high, but you know, there were a number of cases that had good drawings, and we can go over some of those today. But yeah, there were a number of cases that had good sketches.
Even if it's 1,000 really good cases, that's a lot.
You know, and it's really cool, Richard, because once you start going through these and you start looking at what these people are writing, when you see a good detailed sketch of the craft itself, and then there's another sketch that showed you the flight path and the dates and the times, and then a 5-page report to it, Richard, you can bank on it. It's a done deal. It's a done deal. Yep.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So, you take these like top-notch cases in the forgotten QFOS files.
Correct.
And breathe life into them. It's an incredible thing.
Yep. The goal was to maintain an important part of our national history and make these cases come alive. That's what I'm all about. So everything I do is complete visual. It's all illustrated. And it all has the reference works. It has the dates, the time, so that you can check it out and you can verify it.
Well, what we'll do, and it's really kind of remarkable that your artwork is not on a website. It is not published in any book right now. Hopefully we will rectify that at some point in the near future. But right now they are not readily available to people. You were kind enough to show me printouts that you personally made for me when I saw you a few weeks ago in California. And by the way, I was very, very deeply kind of blown away by that, to be honest with you. What we're going to do here for those who are listening without visuals, we're going to have some visuals of these cases that you're about to talk to on my YouTube channel. And we're going to watermark your cases. I don't want people stealing these images, but they are incredible. And is it possible that we can walk through some of these cases?
Yes, let's do that,
I've
Richard.
got a bunch of these images right in front of me. And
Yep.
I'm going to be guided by how you want to go through this.
Okay, so let's take it by date, and we're going to start with the late 1958 FDR case, Richard.
Oh yes, your image of that one is quite excellent as well. This is 1958. I'm looking at your. Yep. You did two here images that I'm looking at, but why don't you just tell people what this one was all about?
Okay, great. So credit goes to Tom Bogan for doing these illustrations. So this is late 1958, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The technical designation is CVA-42. That was the aircraft carrier. And it's interesting to note, Richard, that the USS FDR was the first aircraft carrier to carry nuclear weapons on board. It had multiple UFO sightings or USO sightings, unidentified submerged objects. So it's important to keep that in mind. This took place on a shakedown cruise. Primary eyewitness his name is Chester Grzinski. That's who we're talking about here. This is late 1958, July.
Okay.
And sometime around 9 p.m., Richard, there was this commotion below decks. All this commotion, this chaos and screaming and yelling, and all these naval personnel were trying to get up on the flight deck. They were just rushing up the ladder to get on the flight deck. And once they got on top side, there were about 25 naval personnel that were seeing this light approach the aircraft carrier. And this craft made no noise. It got closer and closer and closer. It eventually, Richard, parked itself about 150 feet above the flight deck with these 25 naval officers right there looking at it. You have a photo or a picture of the original sketch from the primary eyewitness. And what happened is this thing, got within about 100 to 150 feet above the flight deck.
Yes.
And what they saw was if you look at the scale here, we're looking at about a 200-foot long cigar-shaped craft with square-shaped windows running along the side of the craft. That's what they said.
It's the rendering here is remarkable. Michael, I'll just interrupt you just for a moment. We're at the bottom of the hour. I'm just going to take a very, very quick break here. We're going to pick this right back up. I'm Richard Dolan here with the eminent UFO aviation aerospace historian Michael Schratt. We are talking about Michael's recreations of classic and often forgotten UFO cases. We will be right back after this. Welcome back. I'm Richard Dolan here with Michael Schratt. You're listening to KGRA Radio. Michael, we were right in the middle of this. I'm so sorry I had to interrupt you.
No problem.
We've got a craft that you've described as about 200 feet long, or witnesses described it as 200 feet long, cigar-shaped. Right. Windows along the sides. It looks like it's glowing a little bit, and it's just right over this aircraft carrier. Let's keep going.
Okay, so interesting to keep in mind that the windows were lighted from inside. They could definitely see that. And then what's interesting, Richard, is this qualifies as a CE2 case because they could feel the heat radiating off this craft faces. So it's absolutely a CE2 case. It had physical effects.
So again, CE2, again, for those people who may not know offhand, that's close encounter of the second type or the second kind. And this was J. Allen Hynek's classification system that he developed way back when. And it's right when there are physical effects that are detectable from the object itself. And when you are feeling the heat from the craft, that's a physical effect. So this is a CE2. Incredible.
Exactly.
So so what else happened here?
Yep.
I don't want to terminate this encounter before
No
it's done.
problem. No problem. There were a number of figures, Richard, that were seen walking along the length of this craft, inside the craft. And according to the primary eyewitness, one of these beings kind of like rested himself up to the transparent window and then raised his arm over his head like he was waving back at the people below. So I thought that was interesting. And as this thing departed, the whole sighting lasts between 2 to 5 minutes. And as it departed at a higher rate of speed, it kind of changed this red-orange color and then took off. And that's essentially the FDR case.
That is amazing. And this was the first U.S. aircraft carrier to have live nuclear ordnance, I think.
That's correct. That's correct.
Amazing. So probably not a coincidence. I mean, there's long been very, very apparent close observation by these other objects over nuclear technology, nuclear weapons, and so forth. So, wow. So this was one primary witness, or were there multiple?
No, there were at least 25 naval personnel on the flight deck when it happened. Multi-witness case, absolutely.
Incredible. Incredible. So what else you got?
Okay, so we're going to move on to the Fothergill case.
Yeah, which actually this reminded me of, because you've got a case where this being is essentially waving.
I know.
The people below. So,
yep.
So
okay.
Yeah, let's talk about that one.
Let's go into this one. So this is June 26, 1959, Papua New Guinea, at a location called Boani. I don't know if I've got the correct pronunciation. It's Boianai. That's how it's spelled. Now, what I found interesting about this one, Richard, is this was absolutely not an isolated event. They had a flap of 80 sightings throughout June, July, and August of 1959. So this is not an isolated event at all.
I'm glad you mentioned this. This is a very well-known case about this. Anyway, I don't want to interrupt you. Keep going.
No problem. And what I think is interesting, Richard, is when you have 30 eyewitnesses, you know, it's really something you can take to the bank. Now, 1 or 2 witnesses can lie, no doubt about it. 1, 2, or 3 witnesses can lie. But when you have 30 witnesses, it really strains credibility that these people are lying. You know, this is a solid case. It's legendary within the field of ufology.
Yes.
And it concerns Reverend William B. Gill. And basically what they saw were several bright maneuvering lights kind of like in the distance. This is where the 30 people saw it. And as this craft got closer, this was around 6 p.m., Father Gill was called out by a medical assistant. Her name was Anna Borewa. And she reported the strange lights, and that's what brought him out. He wasn't aware of this in the beginning, but he eventually was brought out. And what happened is this craft parked itself about 500 feet above the mission, so relatively within close range. Yes. Father Gill described this craft as being 35 feet in diameter. It had an upper and lower deck. The upper deck was 20 feet in diameter. And then, Richard, it had these very strange, what looked like telescoping cone-shaped landing gear legs on the bottom of the craft. So it looks like a 2-tiered wedding cake with these 4 landing gear legs on the bottom, which I thought was interesting.
And the landing legs were protruded, even though it was at some altitude.
Yep, they were protruding. And there were 4 men or humanoid-looking beings that were on the top of this craft. Now, 2 of them were offset slightly near the center or rear of the craft, and they were working on some kind of machinery. We don't have specific details of what that was, but it was clear they were working on some kind of machinery. And then Father Gill, he noticed that one of the human beings was looking down at him, and he waved at Father Gill in this friendly gesture, and immediately Father Gill waved back. So that's kind of like the heart of this case, is that there was some kind of communication between whatever this human was and Father Gill. I mean, they shared a moment there.
Am I right in thinking that there were flashlights or some other kind of lights that were being shown flash back and forth, or am I misremembering that?
Well, after that happened, he had a torch, and he was kind of signaling to
Ah,
the craft, and this craft responded by making the swaying movements. So there was some kind of communication here, but at the
yeah.
very least, Father Gill definitely saw at least one human waving back at him below. So this is absolutely multi-witness case.
Yeah, Father Gill, I remembered he wrote about this case to a supervisor of his, I believe, named Norman Crutwell, if I'm not mistaken. A very, very long, extended description of the event. He had, as you say, like 24 or so other individuals who testified that, yes, this happened.
Right.
And I remembered the UFO skeptic debunker Donald Menzel had his own explanation for this. Like Gill misinterpreted something he saw, and he just got the easily gullible natives to go along. But it really seems absolutely like that was a ridiculous way to
Right.
dismiss the entire case. And everyone, I think, had a very high level of respect for Gill. One of the things is that these were described as human.
Right. Correct. That's correct.
So this is one of the things that makes the UFO subject really frustrating, for myself, because, when you see flying saucers in the 1940s and 50s, you want to think, well, it's extraterrestrial, it must be. But then there were cases back then through every decade where landed craft were seen and you have a completely human looking being operating craft. Sometimes they're not human looking, but often they are. And I think not enough people who follow this subject are fully aware of just how many such cases like this there are,
I totally agree. In this case, Richard, they were described as human looking. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right around the 6:30 point is when there was a kind of a bright beaming blue spotlight that they directed skyward. And then about 8 p.m. that night, it started moving away, was no longer visible. And so that's essentially the Father Gill case.
Wasn't this more than one night, or
Yeah.
it was, yeah,
Throughout the months of June, July, August, and this is over a 2-day period. This particular sighting took place.
Oh well, I wasn't under the impression that it was perceived to be the same craft. I did know that there were a number of sightings, but are you saying that it is possible that this was like they were seeing the same craft, or they believed that they were seeing the same craft for?
You mean for the other months? For
Right.
the other months?
Yeah.
Don't know about that. Don't
Okay.
know about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep.
Well, the rendition of this is beautifully done.
This is done by Tom Bogan. So yeah, it's well done. It's well done.
Fabulous job. So let's see. We've got about 20 minutes left.
Okay.
I think we can hit a couple of other cases.
Sure, we can hit a couple of.
I'm wondering, are we able to jump to the two Gordon Cooper cases that you have?
Sure, we can do
creations of that. Are we jumping the gun here, or did you want to cover something else?
Let's do Temple, Oklahoma. Let's
okay,
do that
good.
one.
Ready.
Yeah. Now, I really like this one, Richard. I feel it's right up my alley. I'm just really interested in this case because it is absolutely a bona fide Project Blue Book case. This is case number 10270. You can verify this is a Project Blue Book case. This is March 23rd, 1966, near the Texas-Oklahoma border. The primary eyewitness was an electrical engineer working at Sheppard Air Force Base. His name was Eddie Laxon. He was 56 years old at the time. And so here's the site picture. He's driving westbound on Highway 70. It's 5:05 in the morning, so it's very early morning, towards Sheppard Air Force Base. And something very unusual happened. So he's driving Richard down this road, and he comes across this strange shaped craft that is parked on the road blocking his direction. And it's kind of parked at a slight angle. He got within 300 feet of this craft, Richard. And what he described, and I've got the original sketch from the eyewitness, is he described a tapering torpedo-shaped vehicle or something that looked like a fish or a perch. It's the best way to describe it. Kind of a brushed aluminum surface. And it was 75 feet in length. It was 8 feet tall. But Richard, on the original sketch from the eyewitness, If this thing is 8 feet tall and 75 feet in length, that original drawing is grossly out of scale. So I spent about 3 days correcting all the errors, putting all the historical data, and that's the drawing that you see that you have.
I see.
The
I'm
Temple
looking
torpedo. So that has all the corrections on it. So he's basically parked about 300 feet from the craft. Now, to describe what this thing looked like, it had a transparent 3-foot double diameter bubble canopy in the front. It had 4 spotlights on the right side of the craft that were all shining brightly. It had a rectangular shaped opening on the right side of the craft that had this air stair that was leading directly to the ground. And he saw that there was a, I guess you could call 5'10" man, absolutely human, wearing this 2-piece green military fatigue with kind of emblems or chevrons on his upper and lower portion of his arm. And he was shining, Richard, a spotlight or a flashlight on the bottom of the craft like he was investigating something. This is what he saw when he pulled up.
When you say chevrons, I'm looking at the drawing that you've created.
Correct.
It looks like he's a master sergeant.
Yep, some kind of military insignia were seen on his upper arm area. Yep.
Okay, go on. Please
the craft
continue.
had 4 retractable landing gear on the craft that looked like the lunar lander on the Apollo 11 craft.
Okay.
It had a 3-foot diameter porthole on the right side of the craft that was divided into 4 equal pie segments. And then here's the interesting part that I think is very interesting. Directly above this porthole was kind of a swept 6 to 8 foot long antenna or probe that was swept back toward the aft end of the craft that had a small horizontal stabilizer. And then right aft of this right 3-foot diameter porthole were the letters, Richard, TL4768 written on the right side of the craft.
So, all right, first of all, that antenna looks a little bit longer than 6 or 8 feet, at least in the rendition here.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
TL4768. So obviously, this is an American. I think it's safe to say an American-built craft of some sort. Doesn't look like anything that I would have thought was being built or worked on at the time. What the heck is this, Michael?
I know. It's just, you can't make this up. Now, what I thought was interesting, Richard, is we're hearing so much now in the UFO field here about the 2004 USS Nimitz Tic Tac FA-18 Super Hornet Commander David Fravor sighting of that Tic Tac UFO. Right. But if you look at that craft, Richard, it
sure looks a bit like one, doesn't it?
It has the prongs and protrusions sticking out of the craft. I've got at least 7 cases of very similar prongs and protrusions sticking out. One case in particular from Pennsylvania that dates back to 1967. Well over 35 years before the Nimitz encounter, we had the same identical craft.
Well, the same
protrusions.
A similar shape, I would say.
Similar shape, yeah.
Craft.
Yep.
And we don't know about the performance on this object, or do we?
We do have the report. Okay, so when the gentleman who was pointing the flashlight toward the bottom of the craft noticed that he was being seen by Eddie Laxton, he immediately went up the stairs, closed the door, and then according to the report, Richard, Eddie Laxton heard this high-pitched drilling noise, and then this thing departed like a spark off a grinding wheel and made no sonic boom, like 720 miles per hour. In the report, Richard, it says it departed at 720 miles an hour.
That's incredibly fast. Not tic-tac UFO fast, I will just add, but incredibly fast indeed. So, wow. But in 1966.
1966. 1966.
So do you have a theory as to what these, let's just go on the assumption that these are black budget classified U.S. military craft, which 1966 is more than 50 years ago.
Right.
I'm not aware of craft to this day being operational that have this type of performance. So what is the deal with this? Like, why build it? What would it be for? And what's the what do you think is the rest of the history of vehicles of this sort?
Yeah, good question, Richard. Well, I spent a lot of time at University of Arizona in Tucson, and looking through the archives there, I did a very extensive research kind of endeavor on the historical legacy of gravity research within the defense contractors. And it's
Yes.
very clear, Richard, that by October 1954, they made some kind of a breakthrough. They were working very hard to crack the gravity barrier, very hard. Like Martin Aircraft was working on it, Sperry Rand Corporation, Bell Aircraft Corporation, all working to crack the gravity barrier. Now, if that's true, that they made a breakthrough in 54 or 55 that had 10-year lead time to perfect the technology into some type of a flying craft. And I think that's what we're seeing here.
Well, all of the, if people are not aware of this, there were some popular articles on, soon to be breakthroughs in anti-gravity, gravity research. And then, of course, the whole thing went quiet in 1956. That was the end of it. No one heard boo out of it for the rest since forever. So, there's been a lot of speculation that some important breakthrough was made. And you're pulling up cases that actually really do speak to that speak to the likelihood that something else happened. It just makes me think, is there, I was talking 10 years ago about what I would call a breakaway civilization. So a very classified group of people that had exceptionally advanced technology breakthroughs that remain classified, off limits for the rest of us. I mean, I would almost say illegal for the rest of us to go into. I mean, do you think that's what has happened? And if so, what do you have any speculation as to the nature of this classified world, what they're doing with all this knowledge, this technology?
I think you hit it right on the head, Richard. You're exactly correct. Mm-hmm. And in a warfare scenario, the battle is won when you control the high ground. So I think that's what they're doing. Everybody knows that if you can control the high ground in a battlefield, you've already won. And so part of that black budget funding is to control the high ground.
Are you talking about space as a theater of operation?
Well, not only that, but very high altitude or kind of low Earth orbit. But if you've got that in your pocket, you've won the war. You've won the war. And so I think that's what they've done. That's what they've done. And the way it was described to me, Richard, from none other than Jim Goodall, is if you ever hear about a threat against the national security of the United States, some rogue nation, or you're hearing about this new threat, don't worry about it. We've got it covered. We've got the assets to neutralize any threat.
What do you I feel terrible because I want to go into the rest of your cases, but what's your assessment of other nations, other infrastructure, say the Russians or the Chinese most notably? Do you have an assessment as to where you think they are in this game?
Honestly, Richard, I just don't think anyone can hold a candle to us. I don't think anyone has thrown so much into the black budget as we, for example, during the Clinton,
that is certainly true.
Yep. During the Clinton administration, we were pouring $100 million per day on black programs.
Incredible. Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. And a lot of these were blank checks, and a lot of them failed, and we'll never hear about them. They were born black, they died black, and we'll never hear anything about them.
When you say 100 million, I mean, what is the what's your fundamental source on that particular number?
I've got the Spin article. I can forward it to you. They specifically mention $100 million per day.
One of my friends, colleagues, is Catherine Austin Fitz, who's talked about missing trillions of dollars, or at least unaccounted for missing money in the amount of trillions and trillions of dollars. Most recently, she and Professor Mark Skidmore discussed $21 trillion that have gone missing. It was kind of a big news article. Of that, I've talked with both of them. It's a big issue, like what actually has gone missing. And I think, the number could even be quite higher than that, frankly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. So this is what they're doing with it all.
That's right.
They've left us behind.
That's right. That's right.
Left us behind.
Did you want to do the Gordon Cooper things?
I would love to. We've got about 9 minutes or so, and I think it would be outstanding. I mean, Gordon Cooper is one of the most charismatic and just amazing of the astronauts in American history. Some would say the most amazing. A guy who really should have been on the moon, but he was extraordinary for his entire career, and he had 2 really amazing UFO encounters that you've recreated.
Okay, so credit goes to John McNeil for these. Date
Hmm.
is 1951, West German Air Base,
Yeah,
where on two separate occasions, these fleets of flying saucers were going directly over Gordon Cooper's West German Air Base, at least two
right.
times. The very next time, Gordon Cooper was thinking, you know what, I've had enough of this. So he got in his F-86 Sabre and then started chasing after these craft, high angle of attack, maybe 60 degrees angle of attack, trying to intercept these craft. Now, I've been told that he was successful at getting to their altitude, but then when these flying saucers decided that they no longer wanted to play this party game, they could stop in midair, Richard. They could make these 90-degree right angle turns like a spark off a grinding wheel, and there's nothing that Gordon Cooper or his squadron mates could do to chase after these. Not a chance then, and not a chance now using an F-18, F-16, F-15, not a chance. Using conventionally powered jet aircraft today, we could not match the performance.
I'm going to ask, thank you for that. I'm going to ask a tricky question here. I want to
Yep.
know, do you think that in the early 50s, the United States Air Force developed any capability whatsoever to attack via missiles or any other types of weapon systems these flying saucers, as in shoot them down? What do you think about this? I mean,
Well,
you heard this argument. I'd like to know what you think about it.
it doesn't look like we could do it from an air-to-air type arrangement. You know, there's just nothing that we could do to compare to these things. Even if you did fire a missile, it'd be just so slow. We're talking about 5 to 10,000 mile an hour right angle turns. There's just nothing in the inventory that could match that technology. It just doesn't seem possible.
I had a long conversation with Frank Fascino, who I love, and I love his work.
Yep.
And of course, he's talked about this at length, that this was actually a breakthrough, I guess you could say, that the U.S. Air Force had around 1952. So that'd be a year after Cooper's encounter. But you sound skeptical about that.
Well, I don't know. Certainly nothing conventional could keep up with it. Not that we know of anyway.
Right.
So later in 1957,
right.
when Gordon Cooper was at Edwards Air Force Base, there was a team of photographers. They were photographing and capturing on motion picture film reel the setting up of precision landing equipment on the dry lake bed at Edwards.
Right.
And then basically all of a sudden, this about 20-foot diameter disc-shaped craft parked itself over the dry lake bed and then retracts these landing gear legs, sits down on the dry lake bed while the cameras were rolling, Richard. They got it all on film. Now,
what I love is that, I mean, this is among researchers of much talked about event, because everyone knows Gordon Cooper. If he said it, you could take it to the bank. But I love that there's this beautiful now recreation of the event. So yeah, go on, please.
Yep. Okay. So now, originally, early on when this happened, Gordon Cooper was inside a building and did not see this. He had to be called out, and he actually did see the craft. And he also was involved with the film. He rolled out the film. It was high quality according to him, but he did not run it through a projector. And that's when the Air Force courier came on site, and then it was put into a satchel, which was handcuffed to his wrist, and then sent, Richard, to who knows where.
Exactly.
Who knows where.
Never to be seen again.
Never seen again.
Yeah, this is a really famous case. And you've got, it's one of those cases, I think, where UFO skeptics who are very military friendly have a hard time with this. Like I've seen a variety of message boards where there's discussions about this, perhaps on Above Top Secret, if I'm not mistaken. And you know, there are always skeptics who are willing to try to shoot down every case, but you can see that they're uncomfortable going after Gordon Cooper. The man's a legend.
Yeah, that's right.
And really one of the best fighter pilots in American history, as well as one of the best astronauts. So it's very hard to say that he's lying. And Cooper was always 100% adamant about this case. And just as you said, he never pretended that he saw a projection of the film, but he said he looked at the individual frames very carefully and said that it came out accurately.
So really the question is, where did this film go, Richard? And if they have this one, then they've got to have literally hundreds or thousands of drawings, blueprints, 8x10 glossies, gun camera footage. Where is all this? There's got to be a warehouse, Richard, or multiple warehouses where this is stored.
Yes, agreed. But, well, maybe we'll find out before we die. I would like to talk about this. I think it would be that would be the holy grail. Do you think that the Cooper one, the dry lake bed of 1957, was something that we made? Or, I mean, this thing landed for a short while and then took off, I believe, right? It didn't stay for.
It was not there long. That's correct.
So it was just like a little pit stop. What do you have a theory as to what you think? Were we making flying saucers like that, in your opinion, that could perform in this manner in 1957? It would seem early to me.
Right. I can only go by the newspaper clippings that talk about the 54, 55 breakthrough. That would have only given them 2 years to maybe have something in the field. Seems like a little bit of a push. It seems like it's a little bit early. I wouldn't discount it, but it seems a little early.
I have another question for you before we have to wrap this up in a minute. But have you considered a completely non-extraterrestrial explanation? So, in other words, totally terrestrial, a secret but well-funded human group, even basing its work on Tesla tech or early Townsend Brown, Bealfield Brown types experiments from the 1930s, this type of thing? Do you think that would be a viable explanation, like a secret private infrastructure?
So, Richard, are you referring to a quote-unquote breakaway Nazi group?
Sure, Nazi or any other for that matter.
Yeah, I'm open to that for sure. I'm definitely open to that. Mm-hmm. Yep.
There's a lot we don't know, and in terms of, I mean, we're just kind of riffing here, but I don't know how much how much reliable information really can be gleaned out of the German situation from the 1930s or prior. I mean, you hear a lot of stuff being said about it, but nothing strikes me as reliable. There's the so-called Jan van Helsing book, which I think is just one fantasy after another. I'm not particularly impressed by that. So I don't really know what to grab onto in terms of the whole Nazi UFO thing. Right. But you do wonder, like, there's that glimmer of something that does seem to be there. So
it's legendary. It's legendary status, exactly. Right. But it's hard to pin down. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Michael Schratt, I mean, I just love this conversation. I think that listeners are just gobbling it up, and I hope we do this again, like soon.
Absolutely, Richard.
Will do. We're going to continue on for a private chat for Richard Dolan members. If you listening to this enjoy what Michael and I are up to here, go to Richard Dolan members. We're going to continue this and go in a couple of other directions that I think will be worthwhile. But Michael, we're going to come back and do this type of thing for KGRA and YouTube, hopefully in the near future. I would really like to continue these conversations. I think it's long overdue that people hear what you've got.
I would love to do it, Richard. Be an honor.
So you don't have, well, thank you. The honor is mine. I know you don't have your own dedicated website. You do have a page on Open Minds. Is that the most that we have here? Open Minds TV / Michael -Schratt?
I suppose, but I don't work for them anymore, so it's kind of obsolete at this point. So
your page is there. Mm-hmm. It's like this is the only page.
I'm small fries, Richard. I'm small fries, Richard.
No, I strongly disagree. Well, I'm gonna hassle you in the near future to do something about that. We'll have to update your web presence. In my opinion, your work is way too important in my view, and I think more people need to know about you. But that's all the time we have for right now, Michael. I just want to thank you so very much for your time. It's been a real privilege to hear you talk.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much.
Michael Schratt, everyone. Thanks for listening. For more information about what I'm up to, please visit richarddolanmembers.com and richarddolanpress.com. And remember, while we learn and grow and search for the truth, let's be good to each other. Later.